Hey, and welcome back to this European Schoolnet Academy Games in Schools course. This is Module 2, where we're looking at games for thematic learning. And in the second video of Module 2, we're actually going to be taking a bit of a deeper dive into thematic and project-based learning. In Module 1, I flagged up this recent LEGO Foundation white paper on learning through play in schools, which looks at a number of playful and integrated pedagogies and maps these against the 5 characteristics of learning through play. And project-based learning is one of the pedagogies that's mentioned in the report. The really interesting thing about that, of course, is that if project-based learning is a playful pedagogy, and if we can combine the projects around computer games, it gives us a really powerful context for learning, teaching and assessment. The report defines project-based learning as a type of pedagogy where projects are used as the vehicle for delivering the curriculum. It also states that project-based learning normally includes a lot of active learning activities, and that also that projects take place over a period of time. They're not isolated and one-off classroom experiences. Project-based learning has also been found to have a real impact on children in terms of knowledge, skills, and in motivation. But just like any active pedagogy, of course, it needs some successful implementation factors in order to make it a success. The report states that success is contingent on supportive implementation context, including having time and resources to administer, plan and manage classroom projects, and of course that teachers have the time, training and skills and the knowledge to implement the approach. But I want to come back to that word context, because when I think about the implementation context in terms of the resources and the skills of the teacher, I also think that successful project-based learning activities also extends to having a really rich context or theme for children to tap into. And that's why I think computer games are really useful here, because there's something about a computer game which is highly culturally relevant. And if we can use the theme of the computer game and the approach of project-based learning, there's something about this that really captures the imagination of the children, and it wants to make them learn and succeed in all that they do. Now, perhaps this is best described as an example. Let's take the popular game either Guitar Hero or Rock Band 4. Now, to a normal teacher, or to a teacher that perhaps isn't used to using computer games in the classroom, they might be thinking, what on earth has this game got to do with learning, teaching and assessment? But to a teacher who's perhaps more familiar with games-based learning, or a teacher that really has got a good sense of imagination, they might think, well, actually, do you know what? Guitar Hero or Rock Band, that would provide me with a really interesting theme and a context to teach the children about music. We could use this as a context to learn about or to teach children to play different musical instruments. Or perhaps I could extend that learning further and get the children to think about different genres of music, or local music or international music. Perhaps I could even look at different pop chart rankings around the world and think about the lengths of songs, the types of songs, the cultural diversity that's represented in popular music. And of course, if I think about the computer game, then the computer game has got all of these rich characters in it as well. And that gives us an opportunity for children to think about character studies in the same way they could do a character study on a computer game character, in exactly the same way as they might do a character study on a character that was in a film or that was in a book. And I suppose if you want to be a successful, rock band, then you're probably going to need to go on a world tour. And this would also then provide a context for the children planning the world tour. How are they going to get around the country? Is the tour going to be international? Have they got to think about booking flights, booking hotels? Can they calculate their carbon footprint of the tour? How many people are going to actually come and attend? Do they need to research venues? So you kind of get the idea that actually, interestingly, we can use the context of Rock Band to actually do a really rich thematic project on music. Now, the great thing about this, of course, is that teachers have been doing projects on music for years and years and years. But the interesting thing about using computer games like this is that the children will think it's a project on using the computer game, but of course a teacher will be really comfortable doing a project on music, which means you get this really nice synergy which can form, which makes a really rich environment for learning, teaching and assessment. Over the years, I've tended to call this approach a contextual hub. And the main difference between a thematic learning approach and a contextual hub when we think about computer games is that gameplay is actually part of what the children do. So they would be expected, as they were exploring their theme around music, to actually be playing the game and taking the learning from the game as well. And that could be anything from being immersed in the story of the game to, collecting information about high scores or any other game metrics that the computer game might spit out. So the important thing, as I said already, is the Contextual Hub links gameplay to learning. And the key here, as I've probably already hinted at, is that in order for us to do this, we need to get teachers to think a little bit differently about computer games. We need to get them to see beyond the game and really think about the theme. And there will be some themes in computer games which are highly inappropriate for learning, teaching and assessment, but there are lots and lots of games that are available that we can actually link into normal learning outcomes that you would expect to find in any school across Europe. The types of games that I'm really talking about here are what we call commercial off-the-shelf games. These are games that have actually been built for entertainment rather than education. But the great thing about these games is not only are there lots of cultural links that we could bring in here, but normally, rather than an educational game, these games have been built with mass budgets. And actually, if we're using the correct pedagogy, they can be powerful tools for learning, teaching and assessment. And on the screen now, these are just examples of games that I've seen used in the classroom over the last 10 years. Some of these games no longer exist. Some of these games are still being used in classrooms around the world now. And there are, of course, hundreds of other games that could be used. Some of these games are available just for a PC computer. Some of these are apps games. Some of these are console games. Some of these are handheld console games. But there are lots and lots of games out there that are commercially available and off the shelf, and with the right imagination can be used for learning, teaching and assessment. And in the next two videos, we're going to be looking at two case studies to get you thinking about how this type of game might be used. The first case study that we're going to look at is we're going to look at Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. A bit like the Guitar Hero example, teachers have been doing projects on the Olympic Games for years and years and years. So again, we're just going to be thinking about how can we use the context of Mario and Sonic to do what teachers normally do, but in a more motivating and engaging way. The second one that we're going to look at is we're going to look at Star Wars, and of course we're going to use the computer game for this, but you could easily as well link this into the new trilogy or the last film in the new trilogy, which is coming out later this year. So we're going to be taking a more abstract view on how we might use this as a computer game to get us thinking about how it links into delivering normal learning outcomes. So I've talked a lot in this video to try and set the scene about thematic learning, project-based learning, and what we mean by contextual hubs in the context of commercially available off-the-shelf computer games. And what I want you to start thinking about is, can you think of a computer game that you've either played or that your children have played or that you've seen in a supermarket and you think, actually, do you know what? There might be a really, really interesting link between the theme of that computer game and a theme that I would like to teach the children at my school. And if you think of a computer game, you can obviously share that on the forum if you would like to do that. But also, why don't you put it on Twitter or Facebook and use the #GamesCourse so that we can start to see different types of games that could be used in a thematic way in classrooms across Europe. Really looking forward to seeing you in the next video when we're going to be talking about Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games and how we can use that in our schools.